Okay, let's dive into a really foundational moment in American history. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. We're looking at, well, a time when the federal government basically reinvented itself, right? All driven by the sheer desperation of the Great Depression.
It really was a transformation. And today, what we want to do is get past the basic summary you might find in a textbook. We want to dig into the how this huge federal response worked, and crucially, how it left a permanent mark on American politics, society, and the economy. Really set the stage for decades to come.
Right. And the New Deal, it kind of had this memorable structure, didn't it? The three R's. FDR was aiming government power at relief for people suffering, recovery for the broader economy, and then reform, trying to make sure a crash like that couldn't happen again.
Exactly. But look, before we jump into the specifics, there's a really important point we need to make up front. The New Deal, as transformative as it was, didn't actually end the Great Depression on its own.
Ah, right. That's key.
Yeah. It definitely restored confidence. It stabilized things. But that massive economic boost, the full employment needed for recovery,
Yeah.
that really came later with the industrial demand leading up to and during World War II. The New Deal essentially bought time. It helped the nation heal.
Okay, so let's start with that first R relief. I mean, when FDR came in, the situation was dire. People were literally starving, millions out of work. This wasn't just about stimulating the economy, it was about basic survival.
Absolutely. It was about immediate needs. Financial support, yes, but also jobs, putting people to work. And what's striking about those early relief programs is just how varied they were. They were hitting the problem from, well, multiple angles at once.
And doing two things at once, right? Giving people hope back, but also just practically getting money flowing again.
Precisely. Injecting cash directly when everything had just seized up.
Yeah.
So let's look at some examples. On the infrastructure side, you had the Public Works Administration, the PWA.
Right, the PWA. And this wasn't small stuff.
No, definitely not. We're talking huge projects. Building roads, hospitals, schools, post offices, massive bridges like the Triborough in New York, dams like the Hoover Dam initially started before but accelerated under PWA funding. This directly boosted heavy industries, steel, cement, and created millions of jobs. It physically built modern America in many ways.
And then there were things that felt even more radical, like the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA.
Oh, absolutely. The TVA was much more than just building things. It involved building a whole network of hydroelectric dams, yes, but its purpose was broader. Flood control, reforestation, and crucially, bringing cheap electricity to one of the poorest, most neglected rural regions in the country.
And that was politically charged, wasn't it? The government basically competing with private power companies.
Hugely charged. It was the federal government stepping in and saying, essentially, we can provide this essential service better and cheaper. That's a massive statement about the role of government, a huge expansion of federal power into areas previously left to the private sector.
Okay, and what about direct employment for, say, younger people?
That's where the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, came in. This program targeted unemployed, unmarried young men. Millions of them. They lived in work camps, kind of military style, and focused on conservation projects.
Like what sort of projects?
Things like planting trees, reforestation on a massive scale, fighting forest fires, preventing soil erosion, developing parks. It had this dual benefit, providing income, which the young men mostly sent home to their families, and also, instilling discipline and purpose, getting them off the streets, basically.
And wasn't there a specific focus within the CCC for Native Americans?
Yes, that's a fascinating detail. There was a separate Indian division of the CCC. It operated on tribal lands, focusing on projects relevant to those communities, improving infrastructure, conservation specific to their needs, sometimes even helping preserve cultural sites. It shows that even these huge national programs sometimes had surprisingly tailored approaches.
And it wasn't just confined to the mainland U.S. either, right? The New Deal reached further.
Definitely. You see that with the Puerto Rico Reconstruction Administration, the PRRA. This channeled federal funds into public works, housing projects, and agricultural improvements on the island. It really underscores that this was seen as a national crisis, requiring a response that included territories too.
Okay, so that covers relief the immediate, boots on the ground help. Now let's shift to the second R, recovery. How do you get businesses, industries back up and running once the immediate crisis is sort of stabilized?
Right. This meant trying to stabilize industries themselves to get production going again. And a big part of that, perhaps controversially, involved regulating competition.
Which leads us to the National Industry Recovery Act, the NIRA from 1933. This one caused a lot of debate.
Oh, absolutely. The goal of the NIRA was to tackle what economists were calling destructive competition.
What exactly did they mean by that?
Well, think about it. In the depths of the Depression, businesses were desperate. They were slashing prices, cutting wages, doing anything to survive. But this just created a downward spiral, driving competitors out of business, leading to more unemployment, falling prices, deflation, a race to the bottom.
So the NIRA tried to stop that.
Exactly. It encouraged industries to basically cooperate, to create codes of fair competition. These codes set standards for minimum wages, maximum working hours, and this was key product prices. It was almost like trying to get industries to form government-supervised cartels to stabilize themselves.
And it had a huge impact on labor too, right? Section 7A?
Yes, Section 7A was incredibly significant. It explicitly guaranteed workers the right to organize into unions and bargain collectively. Just that one clause gave a massive boost to the labor movement almost instantly.
But the NIRA itself didn't last long.
No, it had a short and stormy life. The Supreme Court struck it down unanimously in 1935. The case was Schechter-Poltrichor v. U.S., often called the sick chicken case.
Why did the court strike it down?
The ruling was that the federal government was overstepping its authority under the Constitution's Commerce Clause. The court said the NIRA was trying to regulate business that was purely local, happening within a state, not between states, and therefore beyond federal control. It was a major setback for Roosevelt.
A huge blow right in the middle of everything. And meanwhile, agriculture needed help too.
Yes, the farm sector was devastated. So you had the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA. This tried to stabilize farm income and raise crop prices primarily through subsidies, paying farmers not to plant on part of their land or to reduce livestock herds.
That was the really controversial part, wasn't it? Paying farmers to destroy crops or kill livestock when people were hungry.
Extremely controversial.
Yeah.
But the economic logic, whether you agreed with it or not, was to reduce the massive surpluses that were crushing prices. By limiting supply, they hoped to boost prices and get more money into farmers' pockets. It did help stabilize farm income, though it also faced Supreme Court challenges later.
Okay, so we've got relief for immediate survival, recovery attempts to stabilize industry and farming. Now, the third R, reform, this is about the long game, right? Preventing future collapses.
Exactly. This is arguably the most enduring legacy of the New Deal. The goal here was to build permanent structures, regulations, institutions to prevent another economic catastrophe on that scale. It cemented this idea that the federal government had an ongoing responsibility for economic stability and citizen welfare.
And given the 1929 crash, the financial sector was obviously a prime target for reform. What were the big changes there?
Well, first up was the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. This was fundamental. Its main job was to separate commercial banking, of the banks where you and I deposit our paychecks, from investment banking, which involves riskier activities like underwriting securities.
The idea being to protect ordinary depositors' money from Wall Street speculation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
To build a firewall between everyday banking and the kind of risky bets that had contributed to the crash.
And Glass-Steagall included something else, something absolutely crucial for restoring faith in banks.
Yes, the creation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. This was, frankly, revolutionary at the time. Before the FDIC, if your bank failed, poof, your savings could just disappear.
Terrifying.
Absolutely. The FDIC changed that. It guaranteed bank deposits up to a certain amount backed by the federal government. If your bank went under, the government ensured you got your money back. This single reform basically stopped the nationwide bank runs almost overnight. It restored trust. That guarantee is still fundamental to our banking system today.
Okay, so that helps secure deposits. What about the stock market itself, the source of all that speculation?
For that, the New Deal created the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, in 1934. Think of the SEC as the cop on the beat for Wall Street. Its job was, and still is, to oversee the stock market, enforce rules against fraud, manipulation, and insider trading, basically, to ensure a more level playing field and prevent the kind of unchecked speculation that led to 29.
So FDIC secures the banks, SEC polices the markets. But what about a safety net for individuals?
Now we get to perhaps the most iconic piece of New Deal legislation. The Social Security Act of 1935. This really laid the foundation for the modern American welfare state.
What did it actually establish?
It created several key programs. The system of old age pensions for retirees, funded through payroll taxes. It set up a federal-state system of unemployment insurance, and it provided federal aid to states for programs helping dependent children the blind, and the disabled. It was the first time the U.S. government committed to providing such a broad, ongoing safety net for its citizens.
And it's interesting, wasn't Social Security itself partly a response to even more radical ideas floating around at the time?
Oh, definitely. The political context is crucial here. Roosevelt wasn't operating in a vacuum. There were huge popular movements demanding much more drastic action. You had Dr. Francis Townsend's plan, which proposed very generous pensions for the elderly, funded by a national sales tax.
And Huey Long, right? The Kingfish.
It's exactly. Senator Huey Long from Louisiana was incredibly popular with his Share Our Wealth program. He advocated confiscating large fortunes and guaranteeing a minimum income for every American family. These movements had millions of followers and put immense political pressure on Roosevelt.
So Social Security, while revolutionary, could be seen as a more moderate, politically achievable alternative to those kinds of proposals.
That's a very common interpretation, yes. It addressed the public demand for security, but did so within a more structured, insurance-based framework, rather than radical wealth redistribution. The threat from the left arguably pushed Roosevelt and Congress toward enacting Social Security.
Which really highlights that something as massive as the New Deal wasn't universally popular. It faced huge opposition.
Intense opposition from both sides of the political spectrum.
Okay, let's break that down. What was the critique from the left? People who thought it didn't go far enough?
Well, figures like Huey Long, but also labor leaders, particularly from the more radical CIO unions, and various socialist and communist groups, felt the New Deal was just patching up capitalism, not fixing its fundamental flaws. They wanted more fundamental change, nationalizing industries, more aggressive wealth redistribution, stronger worker controls. You also had specific groups, like the League of the Physically Handicapped, pushing for more direct employment guarantees and accessibility, feeling the existing programs weren't sufficient.
And then from the right, the conservatives.
Oh, they were deeply alarmed. Their core argument was that the New Deal represented massive federal overreach. They saw it as trampling on states' rights, interfering with the free market, burdening businesses with regulations and taxes, and ultimately pushing the country towards socialism. Groups like the American Liberty League, funded by wealthy industrialists, fiercely opposed FDR's policies as an attack on individual liberty and American economic traditions.
And this conflict played out dramatically with the Supreme Court, as we touched on with the NIRA.
Yes, the judiciary became a major battleground. The Schechter-Poultry decision wasn't isolated. In 1935 and 1936, the court struck down several key New Deal laws, including the AAA, often on the grounds that they exceeded federal authority, particularly the power to regulate interstate commerce.
Which led Roosevelt to make a very bold and ultimately controversial move.
The Court Packing Plan of 1937. Yes, FDR, deeply frustrated by the court blocking his agenda, proposed legislation that would allow him to appoint an additional Supreme Court justice for every sitting justice who was over the age of 70 and hadn't retired.
Which would have allowed him to add up to 6 new justices.
Potentially, yes, enough to shift the court's ideological balance decisively in his favor. It was a direct challenge to the separation of powers.
How did that go over?
Terribly, politically speaking. It caused a massive backlash, not just from Republicans, but from many Democrats, too, who saw it as a dangerous power grab. The plan failed in Congress. It was one of FDR's biggest political defeats.
But did the court change its tune anyway?
Interestingly, yes. Even while the court packing fight was raging, the court started upholding key New Deal legislation, including the Social Security Act and the National Labor Relations Act. Justice Owen Roberts famously switched his voting pattern. Historians call it the switch in time that saved 9. So FDR lost the battle over court packing, but arguably won the war, as his legislative agenda largely survived.
Okay, so after all that turmoil, the programs, the opposition, the court fights, what's the lasting legacy? How did the New Deal permanently change the U.S.?
The impacts are profound and multifaceted. Fundamentally, it stabilized the economy and restored public confidence at a critical moment. But beyond that, it permanently changed the role and size of the federal government.
Establishing that idea of a limited welfare state.
Exactly. And embedding the federal government deeply in social and economic policy in a way it hadn't been before. Think about those regulatory agencies we discussed, the FDIC, the SEC. They weren't temporary fixes. They became permanent fixtures of the financial system, still crucial today.
And the impact on labor.
Huge. The New Deal era, particularly with legislation like the Wagner Act, which came after NRA, was struck down but enshrined similar labor rights, fundamentally strengthened unions and collective bargaining. It shifted the power balance between employers and employees significantly.
But maybe the biggest legacy is political, the famous New Deal coalition.
Absolutely. This is one of the most significant political realignments in American history. The New Deal forged a powerful, long-lasting Democratic coalition. It brought together groups that hadn't always voted together: white Southerners, urban ethnic minorities, industrial workers, farmers, and, critically, African Americans.
And the shift among African American voters was particularly dramatic, wasn't it?
It was seismic. Historically, African Americans had voted Republican since the Civil War, the party of Lincoln. But the Depression hit black communities disproportionately hard, and the New Deal, despite its imperfections and instances of discrimination and implementation, offered tangible economic relief jobs, housing assistance on a scale never seen before from the federal government. This led to a massive shift in allegiance towards the Democratic Party.
And there were key figures helping build and represent this coalition within the government.
Yes, absolutely. You had people like Mary McLeod Bethune, a prominent African-American educator who became a trusted advisor to FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt, advocating for black Americans within the administration through the Black Cabinet. You had figures like Senator Dennis Chavez of New Mexico, who helped organize Latino support and ensure New Deal benefits reached Hispanic communities, and local leaders like Fiorello LaGuardia, the mayor of New York City, who became a symbol of how to effectively implement these massive federal programs on the ground in urban centers.
So this coalition reshaped politics for decades. And ideologically, it cemented what we think of as modern American liberalism.
Yes, the idea that government has an active role to play in managing the economy, providing a social safety net, and regulating business to protect the public interest. That philosophy, largely forged during the New Deal, became dominant in the Democratic Party and influenced later waves of federal action, like Lyndon Johnson's Great Society in the 1960s.
One final point, didn't all this government work also spur movement within the country? Internal migration.
It did. The construction projects, the jobs and conservation camps, the development in places like the Tennessee Valley, all this created new economic opportunities that drew people away from depressed areas, particularly rural ones, towards cities or regions where New Deal projects were active. It contributed to shifting demographic patterns across the U.S.
So summing up this deep dive, the New Deal wasn't just a response to a crisis. It really built the scaffolding for modern American government through relief, recovery, and reform. It created institutions and expectations that are still with us.
Absolutely. It defined the federal safety net and the government's role in the economy in ways we still rely on and debate every single day.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with. We talked about how figures like Huey Long and powerful labor movements were pushing Roosevelt from the left, demanding more radical changes.
Right. So the question to ponder is this: how much did the fear of those more radical alternatives, the threat of truly massive wealth redistribution or state control, actually motivate Roosevelt and Congress to enact the reforms that did happen, like Social Security, the FDIC, the SEC? Were these lasting, significant reforms, in a way, a compromise measure made possible only by the pressure from the more extreme edges?
Something to think about how much the center ground is shaped by the push and pull from those advocating for much bigger shifts. It's a dynamic that certainly didn't end with the New Deal.
Definitely not. Understanding that tension, that dynamic between mainstream reform and radical pressure, is really key to understanding American political history ever since.
A fascinating point to consider. We encourage you to look deeper into that New Deal coalition and how it shaped the decades that followed. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.